So here we have Philippe Piguet. Philippe is an art critic and independent exhibition curator and has been in charge of the contemporary art program at the Chapelle de la Visitation in Thonon-les-Bains since 2008. From 2010 to 2018, he was the artistic director of Drawing Now Paris, the contemporary drawing fair. General curator of the Normandy Impressionist Festival of 2020 and 2024, he has regularly collaborated with the magazine Art Absolument since 2002 and occasionally with the publication Art Press. While his field of study covers the mid-19th century to the present day, his primary interests lie in the Impressionist period, particularly concerning Claude Monet, Piguet's step-great-grandfather, and Blanche Hoschedé-Monet, of whom Piguet has written biographies and is a specialist on. His work also covers contemporary art as it has developed since the 1960s. We also have with us Hicham Boulal, who's a doctoral student in the Department of French and Francophone Studies. And Hicham is helping us today with translations with Philippe. Okay. Oh, Jean, can we get the, your work, little technical difficulties to start this off. That's okay. So I just have a range of questions really for all of you all. But first I wanted to start off with maybe some just direct questions to a few of you. So Philippe, Hicham, hello. Let's see. All right. One of the reasons why Hoschedé-Monet is relatively unknown in the United States is because there are very few opportunities to see her work. Only one painting is in a public collection, which is at the Columbus Museum of Art in Ohio. And also because the majority of the scholarship on her is in French. On the other hand, there have been many exhibitions dedicated to Blanche Hoschedé-Monet in Normandy, which you, Philippe, have helped organize, and even on the larger Hoschedé-Monet family. How would you describe her reputation in France and in Normandy?
Donc, l'une des raisons pour lesquelles Blanche Hoschedé-Monet est relativement méconnue aux États-Unis, c'est le fait qu'il y a très peu d'occasions de voir ses œuvres. Un seul tableau fait partie d'une collection publique ici, le Columbus Museum of Art, et la majorité des études la concernant sont en français. Et d'une autre part, de nombreuses expositions ont été consacrées à Blanche Hoschedé-Monet en Normandie, que vous avez contribué à organiser. Et même mais pensez-vous qu'en dehors de la Normandie, Blanche Hoschedé-Monet reste encore méconnue en France, et pour quelle raison?
Merci de me donner la parole. Je voudrais d'abord remercier autant Galina, Olmsted que Ellie Pierce, et puis évidemment le Eskenazi Museum of Art, de faire cette opération, d'avoir monté cette exposition sur Blanche Hoschedé-Monet ici aux États-Unis.
So he first wants to... Can you hear me? Yes? No. Okay. I think so.
Is your one on?
It was on, but just maybe it's not. Yeah, close enough. Whatever works for you.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, so he first wants to thank all of you and also the Eskenazi Museum for this exhibit and for your works.
Ok. L'œuvre de Blanche Hoschedé-Monet n'est pas encore vraiment connue.
So the work of Blanche is not really well known for now.
Il faut insister sur un point, c'est que Blanche Hoschedé n'a jamais cherché à faire carrière.
So Blanche never tried to pursue a career.
Eh bien, se rappeler que la première exposition personnelle de Blanche Hoschedé, Monet,
And we must remember that her very first exhibit,
c'est quelques mois après la mort de Monet.
was a few months after Monet's death.
Et que de son vivant, elle n'a fait en tout et pour tout que 4 expositions personnelles.
So she has done only 4 exhibits during Monet's life.
Je veux dire par là que Blanche est elle-même un peu responsable de ne pas avoir voulu se mettre en avant.
It's Blanche's responsibility to not wanting to be on the on the scene. She didn't want to expose herself.
La reconnaissance de son travail après sa mort a été surtout faite par son frère Jean-Pierre Hoschedé.
Mainly her brother Jean-Pierre Hoschedé was the one who promoted her work and tried to how can I say promote it. Yeah.
Et il y a eu à ce jour pas plus de, je crois, une douzaine d'expositions personnelles, en tout et pour tout.
So in total, there was only 12 exhibits dedicated to her.
Ce qui est très peu.
That's not a lot.
C'est pourquoi son œuvre n'est pas encore très connue.
So this is the reason why her work is not very well known, even in France.
Pour ma part, je me suis engagé à faire ce travail de reconnaissance depuis une vingtaine d'années.
So he's been dedicating himself to do this work to promote Blanche works for 20 years now.
Et je pense que l'exposition qui a lieu ici, à Bloomington, est une des conséquences du travail qui a été fait depuis 20 ans.
And he thinks that the exhibition that we are having here now is the result of this work during these years.
Et je m'en réjouis beaucoup.
And he is very happy.
Et je pense aussi que c'est dans la conséquence, notamment, et je veux ici les saluer, que des collectionneurs comme Alice Eric Johnson se sont intéressés au travail de Blanche Hoschedé-Monet.
And it's also thanks to a collectioner had been promoting her work, and he wants to thank especially Alice and Eric Johnson.
Donc, en France, il y a pas plus d'une douzaine d'œuvres de Blanche dans les collections publiques françaises.
So there is only 12 of her works in the public art collection in France.
Ce n'est pas beaucoup,
It's not a lot,
mais c'est aussi proportionnel à la production de Blanche, qui est une petite production.
but it's also normal because she didn't produce a lot of works.
Je m'occupe du catalogue raisonné de Blanche Hoschedé-Monet.
So he's in charge of Blanche catalog.
Catalog reasoning.
Reasoning.
Writing of an artist.
Thank you, really. Quand j'ai commencé il y a 20 ans,
When he first started 20 years ago,
j'avais repéré 150 œuvres.
and there was he could find 150 works.
Aujourd'hui, c'est presque le double.
So now it's almost 300, double of it.
Parce que j'ai fait savoir que je faisais ce travail.
Because
J'ai fait connaître.
He make it public. He promotes this research work. Yeah, he make it known.
Et beaucoup de gens sont venus vers moi pour me dire qu'ils avaient des tableaux de Blanche Hoschedé-Monet.
And because of that, a lot of people come to him and manifest that they had works belonging to, like, by Blanche.
Voilà comment je peux répondre à la question de Heli.
So this is his answer to his question.
C'est parfait. It's still surprising, though, that she's still even lesser known in France. And of course, maybe this isn't necessarily the case in her native Normandy, where many of these exhibitions have taken place, but perhaps outside of the country or outside of that region. So now turning towards Nancy and Nikki. Given your backgrounds on the life and work of Mary Cassatt, how can you compare Hoschedé-Monet's reception and career? It's a very large question, but if you have any thoughts just while you were working on these presentations, I'd be curious to hear.
Well, what comes to mind for me, having only, frankly, very recently familiarized myself with these primary literature on Hoschedé-Monet on the occasion of this talk, frankly, I was struck really by the consistency in the language that was often applied to women painters, of delicacy, of a lightness of touch, of a sort of, these are adjectives and adjectival phrases that are often used to feminize women's artistic practice, which was absolutely not the case for a large portion, especially in English, of Cassatt's reception, who was identified as having an almost masculine hand. I wonder the extent to which this has to do with the fact of her preference for landscape painting rather than figural painting, which Cassatt really didn't engage much in. So there's quite a diversion, I think. And of course, Cassatt was a wild self-promoter and tried to circulate her work very vigorously and promote herself. And so there's an extent to which that, I think that Blanche's artistic or exhibitionary practices really speak to a greater ambition, but that they were perhaps somewhat limited by her circumstances. And so in that way, there, at least to my knowledge, there isn't as great a body of critical reception to really go off of when it comes to Blanche's work. But Nancy.
Well, can you hear me? The thing that really strikes me about Cassatt versus Hoschedé-Monet is how different their training was. That Cassatt went to art school. She, at a very early age, at 15, she signed up for the Pennsylvania Academy courses and started when you had to be 16 to go to the Pennsylvania Academy. And even when she went to Paris, she would go to classes, she would engage teachers, not just great artists like Gérôme, for instance, not just people who were known as artists, but she would get them to critique her work. So she had a very, very extensive training. Now, Hoschedé-Monet, when your father or father-in-law or stepfather or whatever, all the various things that he was over those years, is one of the best-known artists in the world, in a way, why would you go anywhere else? It must have been very, very tempting for her to stick with him, even though he wasn't giving her formal training in the sense that we think of it. He didn't let people, I don't know yet how many people he let paint next to him, but he was really kind of rude to all the young people who came to Giverny and would see him on the street, like, "Oh, Mr. Monet, can you look at my painting?" He was not welcoming to that. but he was welcoming to her. And I mean, you can't pass that up. It's like, you know, your father is Rembrandt. So anyway, but I think that started them on two very different paths. And of course, although Cassatt was part of the reaction against the revolution against the academic system, by the time Hoschedé-Monet came in, there were all kinds of other opportunities that, and exhibiting side by side with Mathews and the Fauves was extremely exciting. So, and they did not, even though many of them were academically trained, they did not focus on that level of perfection. So, they were going into entirely different directions.
Yeah, I think it's also a question of thinking generationally as well. We kind of lump Hoschedé-Monet together with discussions of the Impressionists, but also she was a younger generation. And when you think of Mary Cassatt, you also think of Berthe Morisot, you think of Eva Gonzalez, these other relatively well-known women artists who were exhibiting together. But of course, Hoschedé-Monet was from a younger generation. And I was just curious, of course, Suzanne Valadon, another woman artist, came to mind, and she's actually the same exact age as Hoschedé-Monet and has only recently become better known. So perhaps that's also just an indication of more work to be done on these more recent artists. Thank you both. Did you want to? Of course.
Oui, très bien, oui. Je voudrais ajouter quelque chose.
You wanted to add something?
On parle beaucoup de Hoschedé-Monet,
So,
mais il y a un fantôme qui règne dans cette affaire.
so we talk a lot about Hoschedé-Monet, but there is a ghost in this story. What's
C'est
behind?
le père de Blanche Hoschedé-Monet,
So it's her father,
Ernest Hoschedé.
Ernest.
C'est d'abord par la passion de l'art de ce collectionneur que Blanche a connu la peinture.
So at first, it's thanks to the passion for art of her father that she comes to the field.
Il est vraisemblable, d'après des documents de famille, que petite, enfant, elle accompagnait son père pour aller voir à l'atelier aussi bien Manet que Monet.
So according to some family documents, it's highly possible that she used to go with her father and visit artists and in their workshops such as Manet and
Manet et Monet.
Manet and Monet, both of them.
Donc je crois que la toute jeune Blanche a formé aussi son regard à ce moment-là.
So at a very young age, this child could have this how can I say, former son œil. Her eye was
Apprentissage.
Yeah, she learned how to learn to look at painting.
She curated an eye for art, for painting.
Par ailleurs, je voudrais dire que le même Ernest Hoschedé,
Also the same Ernest Hoschedé,
quand il a fait totalement faillite,
when he went bankrupt,
qu'il a été obligé de faire un autre métier,
so he had to practice another job.
il est devenu critique d'art.
So he became an art critic.
Et en 1880,
And in the 1880,
il publie un petit ouvrage
he published a small book
qui s'appelle « Les femmes artiste au salon de 1880.
And the title of the book was the Women Artists at the 1880s Salon.
Je dis cela pour bien marquer l'importance de la figure féminine dans ce milieu-là.
So he's saying that because he really wants to insist and highlight the importance of feminine figure in this family.
Dans le milieu familial.
Wonderful. So, Galina, I wanted to ask you a similar question based off of your own background. So, how did your background in Impressionism and your work on Caillebotte in particular influence how you saw Hoschedé-Monet? You mentioned in your essay in the exhibition catalog how Caillebotte gifted a painting to Hoschedé-Monet on her 20th birthday, which I found fascinating. And how do you think this friendship influenced Hoschedé-Monet?
Thanks for the wonderful question. So I'm very interested in the French painter Gustave Caillebotte, and he must have known Hoschedé-Monet as well. And like you mentioned, gifted a painting to her for her 20th birthday, a scene of the town of Hyères, which is where they both summered. They're about a half generation apart in age, so closer. She was closer in age to him than she was to Monet, and it seems to just be a gesture of friendship. But it's a fascinating moment that really illustrates the way in which, as Philippe mentioned, Blanche is at the center of this Impressionist circle, even before she's a painter. She travels to London with her stepfather, and she meets Whistler, and so she has extraordinary access, both through her father and her stepfather, to these artistic circles. How is she like Caillebotte? Very different. I will say that Caillebotte, like Blanche Hoschedé-Monet, has a comparatively small body of work, which is, I think, limiting in scholarship. I think that Caillebotte made something like 500 or 600 paintings, and as a frame of reference, Monet made well over 3,000 paintings. So the scale is completely, it's just utterly disparate. You know, you think about institutions like the Art Institute of Chicago have 35 paintings by Monet. It's, you know, the vast majority of the checklist for the exhibition downstairs. So there's a problem of scale, and then just of sort of late reception that Caillebotte had a fairly late reception in the United States. He becomes well known in the United States in the 1970s, thanks to the scholarship of Kirk Varnedoe. And I see a sort of parallel track here. I'm not Kirk Varnedoe, but that there's a sort of later recovery of an Impressionist painter, and that we're sort of off to the races now, thanks to the scholarship of all those who contributed to this catalog that's, of course, built on the scholarship in France by Philippe Piguet, of course, and then also of Nicolas Bondenay, who's the director of the Musée Blanche Hoschedé-Monet, who also contributed to the catalog.
And speaking of the Musée Blanche Hoschedé-Monet, that actually brings me to another question that I was thinking about asking later, but let's go for it now. The Municipal Museum of Vernon, France, which is located just outside of Giverny, was recently renamed the Musée Blanche Hoschedé-Monet last year in 2024. This new name is fitting as the museum boasts the largest public collection of Hoschedé-Monet's works in the world, most of which usually remain on display in their permanent collection. So if you go to Giverny, you have to go through Vernon, definitely go to the Musée Blanche Hoschedé-Monet. You'll see fantastic examples of her work. However, I'm curious about what Philippe has to say. How did this name change come about? Because it seems like a pretty large process to change the name of an entire museum. How has it been received among the family and the public? Do you think that it will bring more awareness to Hoschedé-Monet's life and work?
Non, j'ai compris. Ça va aller. En effet, le musée de Vernon portait un nom d'un artiste vraiment très, très peu connu.
So at the beginning, the name of Vernon Museum was the name of an artist, not very.
Georges Poulain.
Yeah, it wasn't very.
Georges Poulain. La mairie de Vernon a décidé de changer le nom pour essayer d'attirer une certaine partie des touristes qui, tous les ans, viennent à Giverny.
So the town hall decided to change the museum name with the goal to attract more tourists who will come every year to visit Giverny.
Et c'est une très bonne idée,
So it's a very good idea.
parce que c'est mieux musée Blanche Hoschedé-Monet que musée Georges Poulain.
So I think it's way better to have the name of Blanche Hoschedé-Monet than Paul?
Poulain.
Poulain. Sorry.
Je n'ai rien contre lui, hein. Mais surtout, c'est que le musée de Vernon possède un ensemble d'œuvres des artistes qui ont travaillé à Giverny.
And another reason is that the museum has, in his collection, he had a lot of works that belongs to, comment vous avez dit?
Un ensemble de tableaux d'artistes qui ont travaillé à Giverny.
Yeah, the works by artists who worked at Giverny.
Ils ont 3 tableaux de Monet,
So they have 3 painted by Monet.
dont un magnifique tondeau. Tondeau,
Yeah.
magnifique sur les nymphéas,
There is a
magnifique.
wonderful Rowan.
Ils ont une dizaine de tableaux de Blanche,
They have 10 painted by Blanche,
des tableaux de MacMonnies,
painted by Mathews,
de Butler,
but
de Fairchild, de beaucoup d'artistes qui ont travaillé à Giverny.
so many artists who worked at Giverny.
Quand la mairie de Vernon a voulu changer le nom,
So when they decided to change the name, the museum name,
ils ont demandé à la famille
they first asked the family
si nous étions d'accord.
to make sure they will agree.
On a dit oui.
They say yes, obviously.
J'étais très content parce que j'avais fait 2 expositions de Blanche, non, une exposition de Blanche il y a 7 ans,
So he was very happy because he made an exhibit of Blanche work 7 years ago.
yes, et une exposition sur la famille
And another exhibit related to the family
avec Monet, Blanche, Theodore Butler et Jim Butler.
with Blanche, Monet,
Theodore Butler
and,
et Jim Butler.
and Jim Butler.
Saga familiale.
It's a familiar thing.
Voilà. Donc, je pense que c'était une très bonne idée, effectivement.
I think it's a very good idea.
We definitely do too, of course. I was just curious about your take. Wonderful. So just to switch pages a little bit, I have a couple of questions related to this idea of biography, which really seems to be a central theme among the presentations from our speakers earlier. So opening it up to just kind of a general question first. So again, there seems to be a theme throughout the presentations today of the scholarship on Blanche Hoschedé-Monet and its connection to her biography, and how this may actually hinder closer study of her work. What do you all think of this reliance on biography in art historical analysis in general? So it's quite a broad question, but you're welcome to open it up however you see fit.
You get to go first.
I mean, I just spent 30 minutes talking about that. Yeah, well, I'll just say I'm not an art historian who's anti-biography, but I think I was really excited by the invitation to think critically about the ways in which the sort of facts and figures of artists' lives, especially when so little is known about an artist and we become so desperate to know them. I certainly feel that way about artists I work on. I feel like I want to get in their head, and it's a parasocial relationship. It really is. And that can sometimes blinker us to the larger social context. As Galina, you were saying, obviously social circles are a biographical fact, but the scope of inquiry just becomes bigger when we leave the home, so to speak. And so I don't think that biography is something we should shy away from in art historical scholarship. And in fact, I think relationships and sociality is a much more interesting and exciting way to approach the question of monographic exhibitions and research, thinking about the how relationships inform particular artists, whether male or female or anything in between. So I don't think that biography is something that needs to be like shunted out the window, but perhaps just needs to be engaged as one of many tools by which we know these artists. I think, to sort of reiterate something that I said at the beginning of my talk, because the lives of women artists in particular are so often sort of dropped out of the historical record, it becomes this sort of rescue mission on the part of feminist art history to resuscitate them and revitalize their life story and to find out, where did they go to school? Like, who did they know? Where were they showing? And that's exciting. But it can also keep us from seeing the larger picture of their social lives and of their professional lives in a way that perhaps we don't feel so anxious about biography when we're dealing with artists whose biographies are so well known that they need no rehearsing, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just chime in to add that sort of at the earliest origins of this exhibition, one of the questions for us was whether to include paintings by Monet in the exhibition. So you'll see when you go down there that there's an extraordinary loan from the Art Institute of Chicago, a painting Monet made right at this moment of introduction, where their families first begin to merge in 1882. And it's something that Danielle and David Brenneman, the then director, and Mariah and I all really spent a lot of time thinking about, whether we were doing a disservice to Hoschedé-Monet by providing this first introduction to American audiences and including, in fact, the exhibition actually starts with this painting by Monet. And I don't think it's a question that's easily resolved or that we've landed at the perfect answer, but I think it's an important part of that introduction that, when we do Monet exhibitions, we don't need timelines of biography. But for visitors to come into this exhibition, we wanted a few touchstones of familiarity, and also to think about the resonances with the EMA's collection. So that's why, that Monet painting is in there. But I think it's a tricky sort of needle to thread, how much of his painting belongs in an exhibition about her life and work.
I'm not sure that I have anything to add, but no, I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I think Philippe does.
Par rapport à la biographie de Blanche, je vous laisse traduire. Par rapport
oui. Yeah, about regard of her biography.
Je voudrais vous dire que il y a beaucoup de difficultés parce qu'il n'y a pas beaucoup de documents.
He wants to say that there's lots of difficulties because they don't have lots of documents.
Mais pour moi qui travaille sur cette biographie depuis très longtemps,
but for him who's working on this biography for a long, long time,
une exposition comme celle ici au Eskenazi Museum,
an exhibit like this one in the Eskenazi Museum,
c'est très important parce que ça me permet de mieux apercevoir les transformations du travail.
It's very important because it allows him to perceive and see the evolution and the variation in her work.
La complexité pour le biographe, c'est que la plupart des tableaux de Blanche ne sont pas datés.
So the difficulty for a biographer is that most of her painting don't mention the date.
Et comme vous l'avez vu dans les documents projetés,
And as you can see on the document that were projected,
In the presentations.
yeah,
on n'a que les titres, on n'a pas toujours les dimensions, on a rarement la date.
so we have only the titles. We barely have dimensions, and we never have a date.
Et les titres, ça bouge avec le temps,
And titles keep changing with time.
ce qui n'arrange pas les affaires.
Signature changes, le changement de signature.
Le problème des signatures est encore un autre problème.
And there is also another problem.
Et
with
des
the
fois,
signature.
je m'arrache les cheveux. D'ailleurs, il n'y en a plus. Hein.
So sometimes
Parce que on a peu de documents.
we have very
Mais je vais vous montrer un document qui parfois permet de se donner du courage.
okay. So we have a very like few documents, but he's gonna show one document that helps biographer to keep going.
Ceci est une lettre de Monet
So this is a letter by Monet
à ma grand-mère Germaine.
to my grandmother Germaine.
Il envoie cette lettre quand il est en Norvège
So he sent this letter from Norway
en 1895.
in 1895,
Précisément le 26 février 1895.
in February 26, 95.
Et dans cette lettre,
And in this letter,
il dit
he says,
« Nous pensons beaucoup à vous ».
"We think a lot about you."
Il veut parler de tous ceux qui sont à Giverny.
He's talking about all the people in Giverny.
La vaillante Blanche,
The courageous Blanche,
que j'aimerais tant avoir ici.
that I would love to have here with me.
Et il dit que elle aurait plaisir à travailler.
And he says she would enjoy to work there.
C'est des documents comme ceux-ci
So
qui permettent
these are the kind of document
petit à petit de construire une biographie.
little by little to build a biography.
J'ai eu le grand bonheur quand j'étais beaucoup plus jeune
When I was younger, I had the immense big pleasure,
de trouver dans la maison de la famille
to find in the family's house
plein de lettres de mon arrière-grand-mère,
so
Alice.
so many letters from my great grandmother Alice.
Cela m'avait permis, il y a 40 ans, de faire mon premier livre, Monet et Venise.
So this helped me to write my very first book 20 years ago, Monet and Venise,
Parce que j'avais 70 lettres jour après jour.
because I had 70 letters day after day.
Dans toutes les lettres que j'ai, plusieurs centaines,
So in all the letters I have, there is hundreds of them.
je trouve parfois
I found sometimes
des éléments de la biographie de Blanche.
biographical elements of
Mais
Blanche's
c'est un
life.
travail de très longue haleine.
But it's a very long work.
Juste pour moi terminer de vous parler, le prochain projet que je voudrais réaliser, c'est une exposition
So my next project, what I'm working on,
à Rouen,
it's an exhibit in Rouen, in France,
où elle a vécu,
where she lived,
comme vous l'avez vu, et où elle avait exposé, il y a eu une exposition en 1959.
and where she had an exhibit in 1859.
J'espère pouvoir persuader le directeur du musée de refaire une exposition de Blanche uniquement sur la période rouennaise.
So he's hoping to convince the museum director to set up an exhibit.
To launch an exhibition focused directly on her time in Rouen.
Voilà, merci beaucoup.
Parfait. Please.
I just wanted to add a note about Monet's letters and how useful they are for better understanding her biography. I don't have the same extraordinary access. I don't have a letter to pull out. But I will say the argument that I made about the painting from 1888 being her salon submission relies in part on letters, one particular letter that Monet wrote to Blanche on that trip to Norway with Fritz Tallow in 1895. And he writes to Germaine and talks about how he wishes that Blanche was there. And he writes to Blanche about how she would love to paint the snow and how he knows how important snow is to her. And he also writes to Alice to talk about the famous painting that's rejected from the salon. So it's pulling these small threads of that give us these kinds of clues for reconstructing biography.
All right, well, we have about 15 minutes left, so I think it might be time to open up questions to our audience and also our audience on Zoom. So how do we want to do that, Jean?
Minor technical difficulty. I need to turn the screen back on for
It's
a
okay.
moment. So if you could gather your awesome questions and thoughts, give me one moment to.
Sure, well, while we're doing that, I've got one last question maybe to lead it. Oh, are you ready? Perfect. Would you like to use the microphone?
Sure. I would like to say that this has been one of the most marvelous, clear, wonderful presentations I've had. Job, and I'm so glad I came today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to organize this and to hear from everybody today. And thank you all so much for coming. But I guess while we're working on questions from perhaps Zoom and while you all are thinking about your questions, one last one for our speakers. And it's a broad one. What are the next steps in your opinion, especially after preparing your talks for the day and of course your lifetime of knowledge on the subject? What are the next steps in furthering the study of Hoschedé-Monet's life and work that you feel are most pertinent? Nancy?
Aye. All right, we'll pass it back. No? No.
I'm thrilled to hear of Philippe's planned exhibition in Rouen. My hope is also that by bringing these paintings together here at Indiana University, that curators from other institutions will come to visit. And it might not necessarily be that in the next 3 years, we need to have another Hoschedé-Monet retrospective in the US, but it may be that when we start to think about exhibitions of landscape painting in Giverny, of Salon des Indépendants artists, of artists working at the turn of the century, that she can start to be a part of those larger conversations. It really is an access problem. I obviously have spent a lot of my life doing this, and it wasn't until I went to Rick and Alice's home that I saw a painting by her. And I've heard that from a number of curators. They all say, oh, I know that Monet had a stepdaughter who was a painter, but I can't think of a work that I've seen. Even the ones that are in French collections are not often on view. So my hope is that the sort of next step can be better integration of her work into other stories that we tell about French painting.
And I guess I'll just add that I was really, after doing this research on the Salon des Indépendants, I was really interested in this question of women artists at that institution, which has really only been written about very, very little. Gillian Perry, for instance, has written a little bit about that. Really extraordinary women that were exhibiting at this in this venue, and their role there. But I'm also interested in why she stops exhibiting there after 1907, because she, and precisely for this period when she's in Rouen, and she starts participating in this new institution of the Société des Artistes de Rouen and the Salon Rouennais. And there's some really interesting emerging scholarship about thinking about this organization, not just as a sort of satellite of the Paris world, but thinking about the very specific context that those artists are working in, and really sort of overturning and upending the center periphery model of thinking about Paris as the only center for art making in France. So I think that's also a really promising avenue for further inquiries, thinking about her move to that institution of exhibitions, and thinking about what her sort of involvement from the earliest years there really says about her determination to make a sort of a new form of art colony or art organization there.
The reason I hesitated was my next project is not on Blanche Hoschedé-Monet, but my next project is on an exhibition and which I hope will spawn more research in this area, and that is the relationship between Mary Cassatt and Berthe Morisot. And so, that continues on just sort of the general theme of the women of that, important women of that era. But Morisot, who died in 1895, does not have a part in the Impressionist artists of the teens conversation that I've been having with Monet and Hoschedé-Monet and Degas and Cassatt, all of those artists who are now incredibly worldwide famous, very, very rich, but can't manage themselves to do this. In the case of Morisot, she had her daughter, Julie Manet, who was immensely influential in placing Morisot's work and shepherding her legacy in the teens and 20s. And I know that, and Julie Manet and her cousin Paul were both trained as artists, and there have been exhibitions of those two descendants of Morisot and Blanche Hoschedé-Monet. So I'm interested in all of these artists and the many ways that the Impressionist artists, original group, their legacies were shaped by their descendants. It's extraordinary, really, how important those people were.
You've given me license to just add a little tidbit that Paul Gobillard, Morisot's niece, was also in the same exhibitions at the Salon des Indépendants as Blanche. So yeah, the connections are all emerging.
Okay, so if we have any audience questions.
J'ai une question pour Philippe par le mystère de la signature. And this is a question about the mystery of the signature, about any theories as to why she changed her name. Des raisons, des théories par cette question, s'il vous plaît.
Elle voudrait savoir si vous avez des hypothèses pourquoi elle a changé sa signature.
Il existe en effet plusieurs types de signatures de Blanche.
There is many different kind of signature from Blanche.
On peut distinguer d'abord le fait qu'elle signe Blanche Hoschedé, tout simplement.
So at first she signed only Blanche Hoschedé.
Et puis aussi les tableaux signés Blanche ou B.
And there is also painting
Hoschedé-Monet.
Blanche.
So it would just be like a B and then Hoschedé.
Hoschedé.
Donc, soit Hoschedé seul, soit Hoschedé-Monet.
So there is Hoschedé, only Hoschedé, and sometimes Hoschedé and Monet.
J'ai toujours pensé que elle avait beaucoup de mal à utiliser le nom de Monet.
So he thinks that she wasn't comfortable with using the name Monet.
Non seulement par rapport à son beau-père,
Not only because of her stepfather.
2 fois son beau-père,
Yeah, because he's her stepfather and father-in-law.
mais aussi parce que par son mariage avec Jean Monnet,
But because of her,
elle devenait la 2e femme, Madame Monet.
because of her marriage with his son, she became the second
La
Mrs.
mère
Monet.
et la fille s'appelaient toutes les deux Madame Monet.
So mother and daughter were both Madame Monet.
Il existe 2 ou 3, je ne sais plus, tableaux
So there is 2 or 3 paintings here.
signés Blanche Hoschedé-Monet, mais Monet a été recouvert.
Yeah, where we can see that at first the signature was Blanche Hoschedé-Monet, but the name Monet was covered in paint.
Why it's difficult today to say. It's very difficult to say. Mais j'ai toujours, et je crois avoir compris,
I think I understand.
qu'elle avait une telle vénération pour Monet
She had such an admiration for Monet
qu'elle avait du mal à se penser Monet.
so it was difficult for her to think about herself
Psychologiquement, c'est pas simple.
as a Monet. And so, yeah, psychological.
Et je pense que c'est beaucoup pour cela qu'elle n'a pas fait d'exposition personnelle avant que Monet ne soit plus là.
And this is probably the reason why she didn't have any personal exhibit before Monet's death. Yeah.
Ce serait même très intéressant
It would be very interesting
de savoir
to know
si c'est elle qui a souhaité faire une exposition personnelle après la mort de Monet ou si c'est le marchand qui est venu en se disant on va faire une exposition de la belle-fille de Monet.
So it's not easy to know if it was her wish to have this exhibit of her works, if it's the art dealer who solicited her to have this exhibit of Monet's daughter. I mean,
je ne connais aucun document qui me permet de penser plutôt comme ceci, plutôt comme cela.
And we have no document to confirm the first or the second hypothesis.
Et puis tant pis.
And it's not a big deal.
Do you all have anything to add?
Another question? So back there.
Thank you. Galina, in passing, you mentioned something about the difference in output from Caillebotte or Claude Monet, and I'm curious, do we have a clear sense of the output or the number of paintings that Blanche Hoschedé had created in her time?
Everyone needs time to think. Yeah. So Philippe is working on the Catalogue Raisonné, which will document all of her works. And I believe he said the sort of first edition of that is incomplete and 150 paintings and now seems to be closer to 300. I would be surprised if it was many more than that. I think that 300 feels like sort of where we've landed. But of course, I think others will continue to surface. It's been a busy time for her art on the market. If you're looking at Christie's and Sotheby's, you're seeing more Hoschedé-Monet in the last 18 months than in the sort of 5 to 10 years prior. So she's certainly having a moment, and my hope is that that will encourage people to go digging, because that always leads to more treasures. And I think that they're fairly well dispersed. I mean, she's selling paintings as early as 1892, and then selling large bodies of works to Durand-Ruel after Monet's death. So I think that they're, the majority were retained with the family, but then there's others still that are out there with other collectors.
From online, the question was, did you make any interesting discoveries when you were putting the show together?
Where's Julie? Here she is. There you go.
Hi. Well, we're in early stages for a technical study, both in comparison to and with Monet. Right now, we've been working a little bit in conjunction with other museums who have both Monet works, specifically the Morning on the Seine series, of which there are, I believe, 22, what I've been lovingly referring to as comparables to Rick and Alice Johnson's painting. And so getting the time to spend not only doing close looking, but also scientific analysis of these works so that we can make closer determinations of, in letters and conversations, we keep hearing about how they may have been sharing materials, working closely side by side. And when Galina and I first started talking about this exhibition, I mean, immediately my mind is whirling, like, can we prove this on a scientific level? We're looking particularly with the Art Institute of Chicago recently, we were looking to see if you can prove whether or not these works were coming from the same bolt of canvas. And there are ways of doing that scientifically via X-ray analysis. So these are the sorts of things where when we're talking about not only learning more about her work in comparison to, but kind of where it fits into a larger conversation of her contemporaries, and topics like the signature and how the signature changes over time will really also start to inform these sort of greater analysis, such that once we sort of get a better handle on what we can prove or what we can further investigate through scientific analysis of these paintings, from there, then, how can we bring that into the sort of larger conversation of the time period, of the contemporaries? I hope that answers any sort of question.
Something to add?
I think that's a great question. And it's also interesting because with every installation of an exhibition, there's inevitable surprises that you find about different works of art, especially ones that you hadn't had the chance necessarily to see up close before. And that was definitely the case with Hoschedé-Monet. As has been said many times today, many of her works are in private collections, and many of those collections are in France. So it can be very difficult to access those paintings and really get the opportunity to look at them. So alongside our conservator, Julie Ribbetts, we were able to see many of these works for the first time when we were unboxing the crates for the exhibition, and some fantastic things were found. Nancy mentioned it in her presentation that we were able to officially date one of the paintings in the exhibition downstairs that hadn't been previously dated, and the date was just blended into the background of the painting, but it was visible when we could finally lay eyes on it. And then also, Julie noticed some really fantastic things in the texture of the paintings downstairs. And again, I've said it before, but I really encourage you to really take a close look at these paintings. Many of them aren't behind glass, so it's a fantastic opportunity to see the texture and see perhaps how she might have worked. But for example, Julie, on the same painting that we were able to put a new date, she found these great little curls of intact dried paint, which are very rare to find because often that texture can be damaged over time, different ways. And so it's little things like that which are very exciting, but even Julie was able to identify little pieces of debris found in the paint layer, which, perhaps that could be evidence of Hoschedé-Monet working on plein air. So fibers from the brushes, yeah, so lots of fun discoveries.
questions? There's been a lot today. This is your chance. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I am very impressed that we've stayed on time. But we have a reception just right outside for you all, which we hope you'll join us at. And I hope you can join me in thanking again our fantastic presenters, our speakers for today. It's been a wonderful afternoon of new scholarship. So thank you all, and we hope to see you outside.